Thank you so much for having me here, and welcome to everyone who's joined today. My name is Christina Bakausel. I am a independent research consultant focusing on young people and youth policies. And I was very excited to have done this piece of research and the resulting framework together with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Dan Moxon, when the participating organizations, the collaborating organizations, CIVICUS and Restless Development came forward with this call to create such a report that explores this idea of compensation. I thought it was such an exciting moment for the youth sector, because what we have been seeing, what we have been calling for so long, is really to see more young people in leadership roles. We talk about them as partners, we talk about them as really in the driver's seat. But we have left out the labor part of that equation in the conversation. And I think that when we talk about young people's contributions, their time, we also, as volunteers, we also cannot ignore the fact that lots of young people are economically marginalized, that we are going through historic economic crises, which are disproportionately affecting young people. But at the same time, young people are also very keen to be participating in their communities. And there, it's such a complicated topic. So I was happy that this research was really supported and led by the organizations to give us space to talk to young people. A lot of our reflections are really just based on a series of consultative conversations we had directly with youth volunteers from the cooperating organizations, as well as staff who in equal measure were also wanting to really support young people in the best way possible and to be fair to young people, but also face real constraints when it comes to the possibility of compensation, especially if that can mean pay in some ways. And so I'm very excited that this conversation is happening. I think it's an iterative process. I think that this is part of the process to have more spaces for our community to come together and discuss these challenges. I think whatever solutions will come from it will be highly contextual, will be really reflexive in terms of the individual organization, the context, the country, the culture. But I'm glad to have been a part of starting this conversation and providing some framework for us to rest our hands on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. And I think it's a very important point what you mentioned, that the research topics that emerge, the way we arrive to this report is not by just thinking about ideas and putting them in paper, but actually by having this conversation with young people on the ground, knowing their perspectives, knowing what is it that they're doing on a regular basis. So that gives a different angle to approach it, and it comes from the ground up. So this is a very important point. And speaking of young people, to get a wider perception of the conversation, I would like to give the floor to Sam. And the question for you is, why do young people volunteer with civil society or organizations? And in your experience, what is something that has not enabled you to engage more in this type of practices? So Sam, the floor is yours.
Hi, greetings to you all and happy Youth Day. Are you able to hear me? All right, so we're good to go. Yeah, so my name is Sam Samuel. I am one of the grassroots resourcing activists with CIVICUS, and then the founder of the Talent Initiative for Development, a youth-led organization that focuses on human rights and leadership and youth empowerment in South Sudan. I am happy to be here, and looking just straight to the question in this regard, then in relation, of course, to the team on volunteerism and compensation. So my question was just very direct, and I think let me just jump into that and then be able to give my take on that. All right. So what they are getting involved with civil society organization is that there's a need to gain practical experiences and on organizational particular, and that is like developing the professional line of work. And this is that maybe most of them have been in schools and are taking their undergraduate studies, and then now linking it to practical work on ground. Always that there's a difference between the classes you attend at the university and what you do on ground. So that is like one tangible thing that is keeping young people the power to get to volunteer with civil society organizations. And then as we get exposed to other networks, for example, now I am able to have the opportunity to network with you all based on actually one of my engagements, particularly with civil society organizations. Number two, there is the point of the love and support for community people. And then, of course, the community work at the same time. Growing in a neighborhood, in a community where you see a lot of challenges that have been happening throughout your childhood until to that level, one with the community, sometimes even if you voluntarily, and then you're able to contribute and offer services. When you know something, it is so important that you're able to maybe share the skills and experiences with others so that they're able also to learn. So on that note, those are the key major points that actually sphere I want to. And there is that feeling that you have the skills. How do I contribute to building a society or maybe a peaceful community, economic empowerment area? Skills is always important to see that you need to contribute on my personal basis. And I took those activities on voluntary basis, for instance, to be able to give what I know to the community and support them in peace building and many other areas that I work for. And the big part of the question was asking about the challenges, for example, that has made me not to continue to sustain these engagements. Now, volunteerism and compensation in this matter is a very key part in development, particularly for young people. Now, one of the challenges always that I find difficult, and also my interaction with other young people find it difficult to continue to sustain their engagements, is that number one, there's distance to actually working places and the fairness. Like, for example, you might move a distance of about maybe half a kilometer or something, and if you're volunteering, definitely you're not being paid. You don't have any salary. Most especially in South Sudan context, most organizations that pick volunteers do not pay them. They don't have any stipends to support their work. That means in the end, you need to have transport, you need to have internet, you need to have pocket money, or you need to have maybe something for your snacks and tea. That becomes quite difficult. And now, if you cannot be able to put this throughout, so it's not easy actually for you to continue sustaining working or volunteering with an organization that cannot support that. And one issue also is the unhealthy working environment. See, some institutions are good, they can lure you into the process after getting to work with them. Even if you're so productive providing work, you find the space of work and even the relationship between you and the peers at work is not really good. There's maybe dishonesty, there is a lot of biasness and division. So definitely one might not need to continue working in an organization that has a space like this, because in the end, you find that you develop a lot of mental health issues. You might be traumatized, so it's better you move out and maybe find a better place to move in or work into. Another angle is my point number 3 on this is the exploitation and then the too much workload. Normally, when it comes to volunteerism, many young people have the zeal, the need to really go and help their communities, but you need to have a structure. And these structures are only based through organizations, because in the end, for instance, I cannot be able to raise money to organize events in my community, and there's maybe CIVICUS that is available that, okay, come and try to work with us. We'll be able to organize some activities to support your community. Then there I said, is okay, I can get, because in the return, my interest is to see that, yes, services are brought to my community. But in the end, you find that you'll be overloaded with a lot of work. And then this work overload you find yourself self-draining. In the end, you get tired, you get exhausted, and in the end, you cannot actually feel you need to continue through with your work. Maybe a lot of work is being put to you. Some people or some other workplaces, they have individuals who do not want to commit to fulfill their needs, their daily roles. Now, if you have interns or volunteers, some of this work role is divided and given out to them. So they are the one in the end that carries every heavy load of the work. It becomes challenging without motivation. So you cannot definitely be able to push forward into that. And lastly, the lack of incentives to support the personal well-being and economic growth of young people, of youth. This is actually the major point here, actually. Above all the other stuff, the key major point is this. Now, if there's no incentives to be able to support volunteers that you've got in place, so it is going to be difficult. First of all, some work environments or civil society organizations, a strict policy, maybe confidentiality policy. Some of them do not want actually even to build the capacity of these volunteers. You find you're there as a volunteer, no one is even talking to you, no one is telling you this is how some things are done. So in the end, your interest is to go and learn and gain practical experiences. It becomes quite difficult if that space is not there. Besides that, the point of incentives and stipends are always very important, because in the end, people have to meet their daily needs, to meet the daily needs. Yes, they need food, you need transport, like I said before, you need medical. Sometimes you might fall sick, and maybe that organization in particular does not give the space actually even to give you some support to be able to have medical attentions, to have transport allowances, something like pocket money. It is just very difficult. In the end, as human beings, in the end, we need to have something to sustain our lives. When it's a small one, it has to really be points that I feel I wanted actually to put out today based on this question and the landscape of other countries. For example, in South Sudan, with the conflict background, there are other far places that you want to volunteer and do services, but maybe the security is not good. You cannot be able to go there. So those are some of the factors that, and above all, also oppression, definitely from maybe civil society. Any question, then you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sam, for highlighting these points. Some key takeaways from your intervention is that first, civil society organizations provide a great space for young people to be able to develop new skills and enhance their capacity to develop projects, carry out ideas. However, there are many structural limitations, including the cost that it implies for you to participate in these projects, and also many times how what you're getting in return might not be directly related with what these organizations are offering you. So thank you for these points, and this is a great way to open up the conversation.
Okay.
Now, thank you, Sam. Now we're going to move to our next part. So on the chat, you're going to find a Mentimeter, and this Mentimeter will be to get some general sense of how you perceive youth compensation. And there are two main questions here. So what we're going to do is take 2 minutes to answer these questions. You'll be seeing the share screen with some of the answers, and then we're going to have a little conversation around them. Okay, we're starting to receive some answers already. One says that volunteer and worker might have a lot of work, but volunteers don't get paid. Participant is less amount of work and not paid. There are also some reflections emerging there, some questions like, what is the benefit to the young person versus the organization? Can they determine their own hours? And some of the challenges, the co-design being a gray area, not knowing how to determine this financial compensation versus salary, and the compensation veering towards a wage, but without having that legal protection. There's also a comment on paid and unpaid type of work. We also have another one mentioning how a volunteer is flexible and they're able to gain new experience and knowledge. And there's an open room to discuss the task while the worker has specific work obligations, including some time that they need to fulfill. Yeah, great reflections here. Another one is that workers are people paid to do the job nobody wants to do for free, and they carry out a responsibility and help and engage with volunteers and participants. And volunteers are those who work for free, but can do work that is more creative, fun, or developing. Some great reflections here. We're going to move to our second question. And our second question is around the practices that you have seen make your time and effort valuable after volunteering, participating, or working with a civil society organization. So we're already receiving some answers. One is always there's a social component, not just doing tasks, but also be fun and done with people. Another one is receiving some recognition, accessing networking spaces, being able to engage with decision makers, getting certificates, expenses covered, data packages paid for, people receiving some testimonial that is tailored for their specific experience. If there's a long-term project, receiving some financial compensation or an stipend for it to cover the lost labor costs. We also have clear and transparent information related to the expected task. Yeah, keep it coming, please. And now that you have seen these questions, we're going to move to a live discussion with people who have experiences around them. So first, we'll move to the first question around this difference between a volunteer, a participant, and a worker. And on this point, we'll be having Anna Plapsig. She's a program manager at the Directorate-General for International Partnerships at the European Commission. And she will be telling us about a unique structure that is the Youth Sounding Board, and how the way of engaging young people here might be different from other type of spaces. So Anna, the floor is yours.
Hi, Leonardo. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon from Belgium. It's a pleasure to be here today. And first of all, a happy International Youth Day to everybody. So as Leonardo has mentioned, I will present to you the case of the Youth Sounding Board for EU International Partnerships. Youth Sounding Board is, if I can say, it's quite a unique structure because it doesn't really fit into any of the categories that you have seen on the screen of a participant, a volunteer, or a worker. The Youth Sounding Board is a space for young people's meaningful involvement and impact on EU external action. And it was set up at the initiative of our Commissioner for International Partnerships, Jutta Urpilainen. And it advises our Commissioner and the DG INTPA, which is the abbreviation for European Commission's Directorate-General for International Partnerships. Maybe for those of you who are not so familiar with how the European Commission functions, you can think of it as a Department for Development Cooperation. So as I have mentioned, the Youth Sounding Board is an advisory structure, and it consists of 25 young people aged 18 to 30 from around the world. The majority comes from our partner countries, and we have a few young people also from the EU, so from the European Union. And we also, I'm very pleased and happy to see that Alda is also here, and Leonardo is also a member. So hello to you both. When setting up the Youth Sounding Board, it was really at that moment a bit challenging for us, I have to admit, because such a structure does not exist at the European Commission. This is the first of its kind, actually, because we wanted really to walk the talk, to have youth meaningfully involved in our decision making, in our policy making, and not to just have one-off consultations or consultations with youth organizations that we previously had. So the Youth Sounding Board came at the request of our partners, of young people, but also our work throughout the years and decades. So it is not really a volunteer position as such, because we have programs such as European Solidarity Corps, which where you have the title of a volunteer. Participant is usually in a program or a conference or a training maybe, and the staff is which is directly hired by the European Commission. So it doesn't fit into any of the categories. It's a totally new one. It's a youth advisory structure, and we have really thought hard how to compensate as well young people for their efforts, because young people serve a mandate of 2 years. It is an unpaid one. However, we do cover their data costs. We cover the participation in physical meetings, so all costs related, so accommodation, flights, insurance, everything is covered. They also receive per diems. There is also the opportunity to meet diverse stakeholders. So when we had the first meeting in Brussels in June, in-person one, they visited the European Parliament, and they had a discussion and debate with the EU parliamentarians and parliamentarians from ACP countries. We also we will fund their participation in conferences around the world, and of course there will be certificates of achievements or recommendation letters when requested. So I mean that would be it from my side, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Anna, and I think this is a great conversation starter. And you were just mentioning the Youth Sounding Board, and I would like to invite another Youth Sounding Board member, Alda, who tell us also in your experiences, what kind of practices have you seen that make your time and effort feel valued, and what have you seen from your different engagements with civil society organizations throughout your career? So Alda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leo. Good night, everyone from Indonesia. It's already 10 p.m. in here, but it's really nice to see all of you and also hearing the conversation since the beginning, because I think the conversation that we're having today is also something that I'm close with in terms of I'm also a youth myself who's working with NGOs. It's also who's working with CSOs, and also I'm also working for NGOs myself. So it's I kind of have like the two perspective from the both sides. So it's really a nice conversation to have today. But back to the questions about what makes me feel that my effort or my contribution are being valued when I in volunteering activities or things like that. I think the first of all, it's about the process itself. I really like it when everything's are clear and transparent in terms of the informations about the work that we are done, the timeline, the tasks, what are being expected from the participant or the volunteers or the people that being involved as worker, what should be prepared, and also in another situation when like you're not applying for the event itself, that you're being invited or something like that, it is also nice to also know like what the specific things that makes them want you to be involved in this project. I think those information, first of all, are very beneficial for us as the people who contribute to the project itself. We can know like what are expected from us, how can we contribute to this, and for the project itself, I'm sure that it's also beneficial for everybody to know like what are expected from them. And then this is also related to the part about the compensation itself, because since we know like what are being expected, we also know like if this is gonna work for us in terms of like, okay, the compensation that they're gonna have, or like how the whole process gonna work. So it's not only for the project to be done in a way that it's expected to, but also for us to understand what the contribution that we could make into that. And then another thing is also just like what Sam have mentioned before, like oftentimes as young people, when we are contributing to or we are participating in an event, whether it's voluntary or as a participant or as an advisor in the Youth Sounding Board, for example, we want to take something from it as well, in terms of like we would like to gain experience from it, gain some new knowledge, or maybe meet some new people or new connections that we might never met before. So this is also another thing that I think in terms of process make us feel that the work that we put, the contribution that we're making are being valued. So it's not just about the after compensation in terms of it could be financial or non-financial, but it's also the whole process itself to make sure that we feel value and we feel that this is something that we actually can contribute to it. So yeah, I think for me, those two things are ones that are most important when working in with NGOs or any other events.
Thank you so much, Alda, for your contribution. Really valuable insights. And now I'll give the floor to Chu to also give us some insights for these questions. How have you feel valued when working with civil society organizations?
Yeah, thank you so much, Leo, and obviously nice to meet you, everyone. I think for me, my answers would very much I very much agree with what have been mentioned earlier by another youth member, saying that a lot of times having a transparent model that really compensates our time financially, that's important. But really, I think most of my personal experiences, what I really treasure is also the kind of soft skills experiences, and most of the time mentorship opportunities that I might be able to gain out of the experience. But then again, reflecting on the report itself and a lot of my past experience, I realized that a lot of times when, especially as a young people, or when we are actually working with young people, we might actually take for granted of everyone's circumstances, and obviously they're spending their time, and not everyone has the leisure of using going online and having data, etc. So what I really appreciate is that I think one part is obviously the soft skills part, where you have that personal development, but then also if as young people, obviously depending on budgets, etc., and depending on the systems, but if they can get the kind of proper support in terms of compensating their time and experience, I think both ways would really attract more young people. I just kind of reflecting on my past experience, I think if we can offer both to most young people, then that can attract actually a lot of people, that we don't need to exclude any groups that they are looking for more of that personal development, or groups that are looking for kind of ways that they can contribute to society, but also being compensated well. So I think with both of those arenas kind of being implied, then hopefully we can attract young people, like more young people, and not exclude them in terms of their own personal capacities or their personal experiences. But for me personally, I think I have the leisure and quite lucky to work with organizations that do offer both of the two compensations, or the two areas or supports that I mentioned earlier. And I think that really encouraged me to then spend most of my time volunteering and really dedicating my hours to the organization. So yeah, that's my personal experience in the past.
Thank you so much, Chu, for sharing your insights here. We're happy you have been taking part of opportunities like the Youth Action Team from CIVICUS. Speaking of which, I would like also to give the floor to Kejal. Kejal is also part of the Youth Action Team. And we will love to hear from you on what is it that make young people volunteer and take part on these programs, and what has enabled you to sustain this type of volunteering work. The floor is yours, Kejal.
Thank you, Leo. Hello, everyone. This is Kejal. I am from India, and the organization I've been working with is called Blue Ribbon Movement. I've been part of this organization now for 9 to 10 years. So my experience starts from being a volunteer myself to enabling volunteering, and then saying that, just volunteering through a program is not enough. Can volunteers actually lead and decide? And as young people, can we be the decision makers of our own movements? So my experience comes from having almost part-time people who volunteer because they're unpaid. But when I say volunteer, I also mean that volunteering for me and for some of us comes from a space of service. What's the spirit of serving and what's the spirit of really contributing? So a lot of our members in the movement really do volunteering because they want to do it for their own joy of contributing to the society, for their own joy of being able to do something for somebody beyond themselves. And hence, most of us now have been in this organization for around 8 to 9 years. And I'm talking about at least, 20 active members and a handful of other 20-30 people who show up less frequently. So it's a range of time that each person can give, and each person chooses how much they can give, what they can contribute. But I think the larger idea being, can volunteering be done from a space of heart and service, and not bringing in the idea of compensation there, for people who can afford to contribute without really any financial barriers. So we bring in compensation as a lens only with the lens of equity. So there may be some people who may not be able to, from their socio-economic backgrounds, be able to volunteer only their time, and hence for them travel compensation and being able to support their participation requires some kind of financial compensation. But that, I personally feel, is not true for all young people, because youth is not a homogeneous identity, and all of us have different levels of privilege, time, resources available for us to contribute. May it be mentally, emotionally, physically, travel time wise, or skills wise. And if we start really compensating for everything, I feel very uncomfortable with the idea, because a lot of the movements like I am part of, we are very grassroots local movements. The amount of resources required to compensate is also again a privileged idea, which I feel a handful of really big organizations can dream of. And if compensation becomes a way of inspiring young people to do action, then it kind of also, for me, takes away from the real idea of young people being active because they want to be active and question, rather than they being compensated to do something that benefits some other person. So I do feel a little different about how we look at compensation, but I definitely also agree compensation is required for a few section of young people, definitely, for whom participation is possible only with compensation. And in the kind of country I come from, for us, volunteering is kind of a part of culture, which a lot of people start doing just from their own family experiences, and a lot of their local groups, society groups, community groups also. Of course, there is a little bit of the capitalism commercialization wave coming in and trying to monetize it by saying that, instead of volunteering, why don't you do something else and feed consumerism? So that's the big battle that we are trying to figure. So yeah, I think from my experience, I have a very mixed feelings when we talk about compensation for volunteering. And of course, we need to do a lot more research to come to understand where it is, what is the right space and time, and what's the right role, and is volunteering the right word for everything, and maybe internship is a better word for places where we need to compensate. Yeah, so that's a little bit about how I feel.
Thank you so much, Kejal, for bringing these reflections. And it's a super important point what you mentioned of that inner and intrinsic motivation and that willingness of service in young people, that could be one engine that is promoting these efforts and not necessarily getting something back in return. With this, we move to our second part of this panel. And here we're going to discuss some current realities of youth volunteerism and compensation. And for this, we'll be delving deep into some questions. And we will start with Anna from DG INTPA. So the question for you is, what compensation have you used when working with young people that you have found particularly significant, and which are some lessons that other organizations can apply in their own practices from what you have developed so far? The floor is yours, Anna.
Thank you, Leo. It's a very good question. So as I have mentioned before, the Youth Sounding Board members serve an unpaid mandate of 2 years. I just need to clarify, it's not a full-time position, neither a part-time. They are approximately engaged or supposed to be engaged around 16 days per year. A method that we have really found, I think, useful also from the conversation that we had with the members themselves, was the more on the side of a non-compensatory means. So in the sense of having capacity, for example, capacity building a workshop, something that they can really be useful for them, not only in for their personal development, but also for their professional development. In addition to this, access to opportunities such as for the opportunity to go to the, for example, European Parliament, to talk with the parliamentarians, to engage and discuss with our Commissioner, Jutta Urpilainen, and with other policymakers. These are really opportunities that are not so easy to come by or easy to access. In addition to this, we have found that it's a two-way street. So we had also the initiative from the members themselves to have the fund to inquire whether there is a possibility to attend conferences that we can fund as DG INTPA. And we were able to find the budget. So we will be also supporting this type of activities from now on. Some lessons that the other partners can draw. I think that it's really important, as I have said, to have a discussion, a regular discussion, open and honest conversation, because I feel that this is what we are having with our Youth Sounding Board members. We are very clear on from the beginning on what is possible, what is not so possible, where there is a scope maybe for a possibility for change. We are also working under our own limitations and constraints that we have to take into account. And we also understand that members themselves, they have other commitments, and that they are also sometimes volunteering, sometimes working or studying. So these are things that really require a constant conversation and an honest one. I think also that I can also relate to what Kejal was saying. I think that it's, of course, the monetary compensation is important, but I think non-monetary compensation is equally important as well. So having maybe a discussion with the young people you're working to see what it is that they would need, what they would like to have, and to just see what is possible. I think that that's the most important thing, really, to have a discussion all the time and to treat the young people you're working with not as beneficiaries, not something that you're working for, but really as partners that you're working with.
Thank you so much, Anna, for your insights. And one key takeaway there is seeing young people as partners and engaging in a constant dialogue, and not just offering, here is what we have, but also by listening to them, realizing, okay, here are some elements we might be able to develop and bring forward. So thanks for those points.
Yes, and
And
if I
now,
might, sorry,
sure,
if I might
sure.
add
Go
to
ahead.
it, as Gail has also mentioned, and we all know youth is not a homogeneous group. So maybe for the youth you're working with, you would assume they really want monetary compensation, but maybe they really would appreciate more opportunities, maybe mentorship opportunities, maybe opportunities to have access to your stakeholders. So by really having a discussion with them and really involving young people and listening to them, as you have said, Leonardo, it's really important to just treat young people as equal partners. And it's really a journey that you're taking together.
Yes, thanks for that point, Anna. And I guess another important thing to highlight there is that sometimes big organizations have access to opportunities that young people will then be able to reach on their own. So some people might not have been able to even talk to parliamentarians in their own country, but get that opportunity through spaces like YSB. So that's the type of compensation that can also be meaningful for them.
Indeed, I would agree so.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. And now we'll move to our second speaker on this part of the panel, and it's Belen from Restless Development. Restless Development was also involved in the development of this youth compensation report. And we would love to know from your experience and involving youth as participants, which has been some of these methodologies and efforts you have done to meaningfully compensate young people, and which lessons some other organizations can draw from that. So Belen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leo, and hi, everybody. It's so nice to be sharing International Youth Day virtually with all of you. So yeah, Restless we work with young people. 90% of the work that we do is directed at young people. So this question of conversation is really central to how we operate as an organization, but also the partner and counterpart that we can be to young people. This, and I think that as this research has come about and we keep on sort of thinking harder and deeper about what this means, we've kind of arrived to the conclusion that seeing, you know, young people as our partners is maybe a little bit too static for the sorts of relationships that we want to see. What we've been advocating for internally and really shifting is sort of seeing young people as experts in their own reality. They're not just a sort of an audience for us. They're the reason why we are and why we deliver the work that we do. And so when we mean a partner, we really we mean a lot more than just when we say participant, we mean a lot more than just someone that comes to an event or someone that we engage ad hoc in an opportunity. And so with this in mind, with this kind of shift in thinking about what a participant means for us, we've done three, I guess we've done a few, but maybe three examples that I can bring here about how we are compensating people differently. One of them became a very obvious necessity during the COVID pandemic as everybody shifted online, and all of a sudden all of our in-person meetings and engagements, which, you know, Restless used to do a lot of, were ceasing to be a thing. We decided that we needed to compensate or reimburse people for their data costs of attending an event, attending a consultation, attending a meeting that was that was seeking their input and their value add and their experience in it, or any really event that we were hosting online. This especially was the case for events that were longer than an hour, just because we realized that while maybe we in Europe and the North, quote unquote, really didn't struggle to pivot to that way of working, a lot of the young people that we were working with actually did, and didn't have reliable internet. Internet was extremely expensive for grassroots groups or activists. This is something that they had to sort of travel maybe sometimes long distances or do a lot of coordination to be able to secure. So we decided that we were going to do that. Moving forward, we would take sort of an average cost for data airtime, and decided to offer the conversation to anybody that needed it. We would normally get at least 20% of the participants that had registered in or were invited to an event say that they really needed it. And we also realized that with this as an offer, our show up turnout rates at events really increased. Logistically speaking, it was a bit of some convincing to our finance team, I'm not going to lie. And I think that's where a lot of these questions, when we applied in real life, there's all of these practicalities that sometimes jar with our ways of operating as institutions. But we saw it really important. We started to work with apps like wire transfer, which directly reimbursed airtime in many countries as a means to make it easier. It did mean a much heavier sort of administrative responsibility for us as an organization, because someone literally had to go and ask for these numbers and get their names and do the payments. But I think that is the right thing to do when you're working with people that have just less resources, more limited accessibility than you. And so we continue to do that till this day. It became a bit more of a, oh gosh, we got to pivot towards this. Whereas now it's something that we very heavily budget for from the beginning. We talk to our donors about the importance of having budget available for these sorts of compensations, because not only do they make our events more successful and our engagement more successful, but I think it's a question of equity at the end of the day, and how we engage and support the time of the young people that we want to work with. And yeah, I can talk at length about the practicality of it if it's necessary, but just I don't want to extend myself, and just to other things that we've been doing a lot of to compensate young people. One of them is thinking, for example, recently Restless Development updated its strategy, and we could have hired a consultant to do it, but that wouldn't have made sense for us. And obviously, if you're thinking to hire a consultant, you would pay them. But we wanted young people to input into that process because they know better and they're the right audience to help us decide our future strategy. And it just made sense to compensate them financially for their time and their expertise and the knowledge that they were bringing into this process. And I think when we presented it as we would pay a consultant that would help us kind of achieve a really similar result. Why wouldn't we pay young people? That kind of, I think, destroyed any argument against, well, should we really pay them? Is this the right thing to do, right? And I think that it's a no-brainer almost. And we have many different forms of these groups with young people. Sometimes they're called youth task teams. Sometimes they're called youth co-design teams. Other times there's strategy reference groups. But at the end of the day is being able to see their value-adding contribution as expertise, which is not less important than a person with a master's degree and 15 years of experience in doing strategic processes, and sort of equating that, because for us that was what made sense and really brought value. And then just similar to what Anna was saying earlier about sort of going beyond financial compensation and seeing compensation as something that is a lot more than money. We were working with volunteers in some of our countries, and we at first we had developed a learning journey that was very much centered around the objective of the project in and of itself. So data collection, analysis, question, interview setting. And then we realized that, I mean, that benefited us a lot, but maybe young people wanted a lot more out of an engagement like this. We went out, we talked to them at length about it, and then we ended up adding a whole kind of professional development element of it that was very much determined by them. And it included things that maybe I would have never thought of, like writing your CV and a good cover letter. And that's something that we've now sort of integrated into how we set up any capacity strengthening moment. And I am done. I hope that was not too long.
Thanks, Belen. And I really appreciate some comments that you brought here. First, the part of generating equity, that not everyone is in the same position to be able to participate in spaces, and how to bridge that gap. And secondly, recognizing the value that young people can bring. For example, here that they could deliver same kind of quality that a consultant. So why not paying young people for this effort and walking the talk and being more coherent with the type of projects that you want to execute. So thank you for that. And moving forward, we'll have our final speaker for this round. And it's on this area of youth as workers, and Belen briefly touched upon this topic of co-designing. So we'll have Pelumi, who was part of the CIVICUS Youth Action Lab co-design team. And we would love to know how was this process of compensation for you, especially when it comes to co-design, and what's that blurry line that you might have seen between volunteering and working, and how this type of work is somewhere in between. So Pelumi, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope everyone is doing well. So exactly what the last speaker said, that was my experience with CIVICUS. So in 2019, I was part of the team that was selected to work together with CIVICUS to launch the Youth Action Lab, which is what we called it after the whole design process. And it was a great experience because, CIVICUS was really putting their mind and time into what they really value, which is getting youth collaboration. And basically they launched this call for application for different youth groups who might have been working together or would come together as a team. And basically in that case, my team was selected. We're about a team of 9 people coming from different regions of the Global South. And it was great because it was exactly that. We were called upon to give, advice, expertise, our experiences, and we're compensated for what we knew, from our experiences. And it was great because it was the first time that I actually realized that an organization really cared about young people, but would also, fund them to do what they like most, which is supporting youth movements and youth-led initiatives. So in that process, we designed the Youth Action Lab, which basically was to then support a cohort of about 10 participants for 2020, where they would, CIVICUS would also give them unrestricted funding. At that time, I believe it was $5,000 for their own youth initiative. And it was great because we knew what the young people needed. And, CIVICUS just brought us on to help them better design that process, exactly what the speaker said before. Instead of going to like a team of consultants with 20 years of experience, CIVICUS decided to invest in us and bring us on board, work with them, design the whole thing from scratch, and really deliver a product that would be not only useful for the young people that would benefit from the process, but really, get an accurate understanding of what young people really needed and the type of supports they were really looking for. So that was a great experience. And back to your question regarding, I don't know how you paraphrased it, but I'll try to re-say it. It was like the line between volunteering and being paid for, right? Definitely it makes a difference because many young people, they've been doing this work in activism for many years, and they don't get $1 for the work they do, right? So seeing many NGOs, especially international NGOs, and youth organizations or organizations that work with young people paying, for the first time, and it's becoming a trend. It's a good shift in the I want to call it in the industry, right? Young people start to feel valued. And not only, is it something that we value, but also it's something that it's now being replicated by other organizations, which means that, this mindset shift, we're really seeing it taking place where organizations see the value of hiring young people directly and paying them for their expertise. So it makes us feel valued and definitely also boosts our curriculum and our credentials, right? You've done this job for XYZ organization, and next time, you get more opportunities so that can be paid for the work you've done. I hope I've answered your question. I'm happy to explain a bit more too.
Thank you so much, Palumi, for your contribution. And definitely great point about how this is a wave and more people are jumping into this wave and realizing that young people bring value and it's important to invest in them. So great to know how these internal practices within organizations could be modified. And with this, we'll come to a break. We're going to give a break to our translators who have been working very hard to help us bridge the gap between languages for this International Youth Day. So we'll see you back here in 10 minutes at past 12. Thanks a lot. And now we'll be talking about another important point. We saw all the possibilities that we have to be able to bring forward this type of youth compensation. But there's also another side to this story, and these are the challenges. So here I would like us to get started with Anna. And one thing, when you work with people from many different countries and there's different purchasing power, cost of living, characteristics that they have, how do you approach this compensation? Do you have a standardized compensation or contextualized? And which other tips you might have for this type of adaptation of compensation depending on context?
Thank you, Leonardo. So as I have already previously mentioned, when it comes to monetary compensation, we are reimbursing the data costs. So YSB meaning the Youth Sounding Board members are receiving a monthly stipend, a fixed one, which is standardized for all 25 members. And when it comes to physical meetings, we are reimbursing all costs related to their participation. So flights, accommodations, insurance, visa costs, and so on and so forth. They also receive a per diem, which is at a set rate for Belgium. So it's the same for everybody. So now when it comes to the reimbursement of data cost, it was a bit challenging for us to as you have said, we have 25 countries and different contexts when it comes to the living standards. So what we have done is we have research for each of the countries, and we have decided to use a standardized rate in order also to diminish the administrative burden on our end. And the rate that we chose is covering the highest cost of the data, plus some more. Because even in some cases, I saw a comment in the chat, really reimbursing data costs for young people's participation is essential, even if you cannot maybe afford to have a compensation in or pay the meetings, or maybe it's not foreseen in your organization's policies. Depends on different types of context. At least I think that organizations should strive to allow for this type of meaningful involvement. And some other tips that I would have is really to try to have, besides monetary compensation, also the non-monetary one. So that will depend also on the context, of course, and the possibilities of each organization. But for example, as I said, we offered the capacity building workshops for our young people. And this is done actually, the workshops themselves are chosen by the participants, the YSB members. And Apart from this, we offer to them opportunities when we have them for their engagements in some conferences, plus this opportunity to have their participation in conferences funded. And just to mention here, this is a conference of their choice, so it's not us saying which conference they need to attend. It's them expressing interest, and then of course we make a decision together to see how we can go forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. And it's also a great point that when it comes to compensation, it can be contextualized when it comes to these non-financial opportunities. Now I'd like to move on to our experience within CIVICUS. So my colleague Elisa will speak here. And what is it that currently is limiting the compensation of young people from happening? And what do you think are some pillars of this youth compensation?
Thank you so much, Leo, and hello everyone. Happy International Youth Day. It's a wonderful time and space to be all together to celebrate the power of youth and this pertinent conversation. With regards of limitations, I think I would love to invite everyone to help me answer it. So please type in the chat, what limitations do you think are the ones that we're facing to enable compensation for young people? What I'm going to do is to share at least 3 that pop up in the research process and that sadly we face daily in many organizations. But again, would love to hear your experiences and your thoughts. So first one for this complex topic, we'll say that there are very steep operational and legal constraints. When we say that we want to provide financial compensation for young people, we need to look into labor laws, into funding requirements in certain countries. What was something mentioned in the chat, the transaction processes and systems that we need or not to use. All of these sort of institutional boundaries that, if we look back into history, come from a culture of, well, first the habit, when we started seeing the beginnings of how citizens were organizing was from a voluntary basis, and we still see it now. It's just that in the 80s, 90s, when we had this boom of NGOs, sadly, many of us copied a corporate structure of organizing. And with that, we actually, not all of us, kind of managed to translate the volunteering culture into our ways of working. So not all the organizations have, for example, a volunteers policy or a participants guide note or a co-designed framework. So those blurred lines may create a lot of confusion, may create a lot of fear and uncomfort in institutions that are trying to answer this, but do not have the legal background to answer them. There is another one around safeguarding. So what we've heard is, yes, it's great and it's fair, and we must practice equity when working with young people as partners in creating projects, strategies, initiatives, etc. However, we've seen that when one individual person receives a large sum of money from an organization, that person might perceive a bit of resistance in their community, a bit of discrimination, a bit of envy, jealousy, like why him or her and not me, disconnect with the community, some issues on legitimacy, like how that person was elected and not me. And if the international organization is not capable and ready and willing to mitigate that risk, we're putting people in a very dangerous situation that we don't want to. So how to mitigate that, how to make sure that when we're compensating one person, we are very clear on why that person and for what services or what practices. I see that Fatuma is sharing that in Plan you have very different ways, so please share. It's a very interesting chat, very lively. The other one I wanted to share is about a worry of creating an economy around civic participation. We don't want to see a world in which volunteerism disappears completely. What Kajal was mentioning and many panelists, we are here because we want to service our community, because we love our community, because we want to be kind to it. We don't want to create a culture in which we participate only because there's a financial compensation. And we don't want to see young people saying bye to school, bye to their careers, bye to other opportunities just because an international organization is providing as honorarium for a very short-term engagement. If the international organization, and that speaks to the point, I think also Kajal and Chu, well, I think everyone was referring Christina. If the international organization is identifying a need, has the resources to create a job to accomplish that deliverable and have that service completed, then create a job. We are also very careful that this is a blurred line, as Palumi was saying, between jobs that have very clear terms of reference, job descriptions, expectations, timelines, and a contribution to a community just very slightly short-term, etc. So that's what I will say, that we need to be very clear with our intentions on why are we engaging young people, very mindful that we need to fundraise when we partner with young people, contribute and collaborate in an equitable way with the right values and systems in place. So everyone is safe, everyone is respected, everyone is clear, and we continue working from our hearts, minds, and hands in a way that represents our values. But yeah, we'd love to hear everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elisa, for sharing these points. And definitely we need to be careful of the risk of not monetizing volunteerism and just trying to take the motivation of young people to be just the money and not their inner motivation. And to close this round, I would like to invite Alda. One trend that we have seen is when it comes to working with youth and children. How do you go about it? Would you put them in the same group when it comes to compensation? Do you foresee any risk when it comes to remunerating children? And if so, how can that be overcome? The floor is yours, Alda.
Yes, thank you, Leo. Yeah, I think working with children and working with young people are two different cases, especially when in the consideration of safeguarding. I believe that there are risks that are higher in children compared to the young people. For instance, like if we're looking at the age range, due to their age, children might be less powerful in a family dynamic, which might put them in a more risk of being exploited, or in a risk of the compensation itself doesn't benefit for their own good. Or if we are looking at in terms of living, for example, oftentimes children are more likely to still live with their parents or with their parental figure, while young people might live by themselves or like have been already moved out. And I think that this also put a different risk between children and young people. And then another thing that comes to mind is also in terms of like if we are giving compensation in a financial mode, it also needs to be taken into consideration about the mobility that the children have and the young people have, that they might not have the freedom of mobility to be able to spend the financial compensation that being given to them in a way that will be beneficial for them or in a way that they would like to due to they do not have the freedom of mobility, for example. And in a way to overcome this, based on my experience, when working with children, one of the method of or mode of compensation that work the best are the ones that are not financial type of compensation. So for example, like in terms in a form of gift, and you can give and you can make it specifically on what they need. Like it can comes in a forms of you're giving them school supplies, or it can comes in a forms of a laptops or anything that like it can be directly on what they need. So you managing that risk of the compensation itself not being benefit for them by actually giving something that just specifically designed for their needs or something like that. And then in another case, I also, this is not the ones that I apply with myself, but another college actually also share a story that another way to compensate, maybe not the word compensate, but like another way that we can do is in beside gifts is also in forms of voucher, for example, like voucher for them to be able to join certain classes, or voucher for them to be able to join certain training or participate in certain classes that they would like to. Or in another cases, it all can also be in a form of like we're giving them voucher, but those voucher are specifically designed for that they can only use it for school supplies, for example, or any other things that we know that it can mitigate those risks of those compensation being used for other things that might not be beneficial for the children itself. And in another case, it also can be in a form of education fund. But in this, I think that the organizations also have the responsibility to ensure that these funds is actually beneficial for the children itself, so it doesn't go to any other parties or any other people around them. And I think few ways that we can do to mitigate this risk is, for example, working with a third party. So for instance, if we're giving an education fund, we can work with the bank to ensure that, okay, these funds can only be taken out in, let's say, the beginning of school year, for example, because we want the fund itself to be used for the education. Or maybe when the fund is the fund want to be cast out, they need like authorization from the organization, for example, or things like that. So I believe that there's definitely a difference when we are trying to giving compensation to youth and children. It also needs to be taken into consideration about their safety and how to make sure that this benefit are actually, or this compensation are actually come straight to them and benefit for their own good instead of being used for other things. So initial assessment on like what are the situations like with the children that we're working with or with the youth that we're working with are definitely very important to make us understand what are the situation is like, or what are the social and the culture is like within the people itself, so to ensure that they gain benefit out of the compensation that we're giving. It's not just another thing that actually put them in danger.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alda, for your insights, and definitely that help us to see how we can approach the compensation of children in ways that are aligned with their needs, and how non-financial compensation might be useful here, and access to classes, knowledge, opportunities that are valued by them. And with this, we are coming to a close of our live streaming. I want to thank all who joined the session, but I know many of you still have some questions and want to keep the discussion going. So on our Zoom meeting, we'll be going to breakout groups, and we'll be having a chance to talk a bit more in depth about some of the topics discussed today.